Hey guys, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. Today we're going to do some good old-fashioned Q&A. I've got a list of questions, some I've gathered from friends, some I've thought up, and we're going to run through them and I will give you my perspective. You know, one of the reasons why I started this podcast is because I had this experience of rediscovering hunting as an adult, or more like just doing it on my own for the first time, and I had a lot of questions. And if you don't know someone who hunts, it can be hard to get these questions answered. I think there's a lot of people out there who are perfectly capable of hunting, but they're kind of inhibited by all these things they don't know. And even after you watch like 8 seasons of Meat Eater and all these awesome hunting videos on the internet, there's still things that are left out that are kind of important. A good example that I use all the time is after the kill. The hunt doesn't stop once you've killed the animal. But if you've never hunted before, you might not even know what goes on after the kill. A lot of hunting videos show the shot, and then they show the host just walking away with a full pack. But as a viewer, you're thinking, wait, how long did it take you to find the animal after you shot it? And how did you cut that up? And how many trips did it take you to get it out? So I think sometimes the basics can get overlooked. And that's what I wanted this podcast to be about. I want to fill the gaps for people who want to do this, but literally don't know how, or just don't know where to start. Maybe you don't have that much outdoorsmanship experience either. I'm trying to leave no stone unturned so you can get from wherever you are right now to hunting confidently on your own. Now, for you guys who are already experienced hunters, hopefully this podcast is still interesting to you and maybe serves as a refresher. But even more, I hope it can be a resource that you can share with your friends to help them get started hunting. So today we're just going to go over some questions. Maybe you've wondered them before. And then next week, we're going to talk about the steps you need to take to get out hunting this fall. If you guys enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to rate it 5 stars on whatever platform you listen on. I use Spotify, but I think most of you listen on Apple, which is kind of interesting. But wherever you're listening, please rate it 5 stars, hit that follow button, and especially share an episode with a friend. As we get closer and closer to hunting season, we've got to get our friends ready to go. And of course, sharing this episode will also help the podcast grow. So thank you for supporting the podcast, and let's get into the Q&A. All right, so if you guys listened to the podcast last week, you'll know that we were talking about hunting terms that you would hear at the range. And there is one obvious one that I just completely left out. I said it a couple times, but I never explained it. So I want to explain that now. And the question is, what are grains? So often you'll hear someone say a 180 grain bullet or a 143 grain bullet. And the grain is a tiny unit of measurement for weight. So the higher the grain weight, the heavier the bullet. A 180 grain bullet would be heavier than a 55 grain bullet, for example. Now, to get an idea of how small a grain is, there are 7,000 grains in a pound. And there are 437.5 grains in an ounce. So most hunting bullets are much less than an ounce. Most hunting bullets probably fall in that like 90 to 180 grain range. And so they're pretty small, right? They're pretty light. Now, the grain weight can make a big difference though, because it will affect the shape and the ballistics and recoil and penetration of a bullet. So if you think of a 180 grain core locked bullet, let's say it's a 30 caliber 180 grain bullet, and then you compare that with a 150 grain 30 caliber core locked bullet. So the same manufacturer, like the same materials, except that 180 grain bullet is heavier than the 150 grain bullet. Well, the 180 grain bullet is most likely going to be longer, which will help its ballistic coefficient, meaning it will help make it more aerodynamic. The 180 grain bullet will also carry more energy downrange, so it's just going to hit a little bit harder than the 150 grain bullet. And they're also going to fly differently because of the different ballistic coefficients and just the way that they're shaped, and also the speeds at which they are exiting the muzzle. That lighter bullet is going to go faster than the heavier bullet with the same charge behind it. Now, one thing you need to watch out for as a new hunter is making sure you use the same grain weight of bullet. And in fact, the same bullet that you sight in with for hunting. So if you sighted in with that 180 grain bullet, but then you used the 150 grain bullet when you're hunting, your shots are going to be off. And this is actually true even if there's the same grain weight, but you're using a different type of bullet. So if you used, say, a 180 grain bullet from Hornady and a 180 grain bullet, same weight, same caliber, all that from Remington, the two bullets are likely going to fly differently. So make sure you just have consistency in the ammunition that you sight in with and the ammunition you go hunting with. All right, let's move on to our next question. And that is, do I need camo to hunt? Do I need camouflage clothing to hunt successfully? And the short answer is no. You can kill animals without camouflage. I think the hunting industry pushes camouflage far too much because it's really easy to get people to spend money on, and it looks good to a human's eye, and it's just one thing that you can do easily that makes you feel like you have an advantage. That's what I think, but you don't need camo to hunt. If you look at pictures from not so long ago, you'll see guys hunting deer in the woods wearing red flannel. And even today, you'll see pictures of people wearing blue jeans to hunt. And blue is actually one of the colors that deer and elk are supposed to see pretty well. So oftentimes, if someone asks me what to wear hunting, I'll say, wear whatever you've got. Avoid blue jeans if you can, but it's not a big deal if you wear them. Now, the long answer is that camouflage can be helpful in certain contexts, okay? And some more than others. So camouflage in your Western big game hunting scenario, where maybe you're taking a shot at 250 yards, maybe it's not as important. But if you are turkey hunting, for example, turkeys have great eyesight. And so it's actually helpful to have camo in that scenario, especially because when you're turkey hunting, you're trying to get them in close enough to shoot with a shotgun. And they really do have good eyesight. So if you're moving around or if you're wearing something that really sticks out, they can see you. That's also true with a lot of other bird hunting. If you're in a blind and you're wearing something that really sticks out from your surrounding while you're duck hunting, they can come over the top and see you, and that might spook them. And then another situation where you might want camo is if you're archery deer hunting. You're trying to get in within 40 yards of a deer maybe, and it can be helpful when you don't have many other advantages. Maybe you're just up in a tree or even on the ground and you're waiting for them to come in and trying to be still. And it might mean the difference between them being confused about what you are and you getting a shot versus them spotting you and taking off. But in general, you can still go hunting if you don't have camo. And in fact, I encourage you to go hunting even if you don't have camo. Don't let that hold you back. And then if you go hunting and you really enjoy it, you can then invest in camo if you think it's worth it for you. If you are in a situation where you don't have camouflage, but you think some concealment would be helpful, just build a natural blind of some sort. I've done this all the time deer hunting, where I was hunting on the ground with a crossbow, and people say it's very hard to bow hunt from the ground. And I just built natural blinds. They're not that hard because they don't have to be that big. You hunker down behind it, and it just gives you a little bit of an advantage. The last thing I'll say about camo is that there are other skills that you need to master besides not being seen that are arguably more important. And one of those is playing the wind, making sure that your wind doesn't get blown to the animal. And this is important for most mammal hunting. So coyotes, bears, elk, deer, what have you, right? Anything that can smell decently well, you're going to want to make sure that they don't catch your wind. And if you can start learning to control your scent and use the wind to your advantage, you're going to be much more successful than someone who is dressed in the most expensive, up-to-date camo, but doesn't play the wind well. All right, our next question is, how do I start hunting? And this is a great question. Someone asked me this the other day, and I kind of stammered a little bit because I was like, oh man, I've got a lot to tell you, and it's hard to know exactly where to start. So today I'm going to give you a short answer because next week I'm actually going to answer this question in depth and give you guys some steps for starting hunting if you've never done it before or if you're picking it back up again. But for today, I'm going to say to start hunting, go get your hunter's education or hunter's safety certification. Okay, so most states are going to require you to take a hunter's ed course, and this is going to teach you how to be safe while hunting and with a weapon, and even teach you sort of the basics of hunting. And that's the place to start because it's going to take some time. The course that I did back in the day was 2 8-hour sessions, so it was a whole weekend in person. A lot of these courses today are online or hybrid, so you can do an online portion and then go finish it up in person. But the reason I say to do that and start there is twofold. One, you're going to need it before you can get any license or any tags, before you can hunt at all. And then two, when you go to a hunter's ed course, you can meet people who hunt. And if someone's there volunteering and teaching a hunter's ed course, chances are that they're going to be very interested and that they want people to start hunting. So you can go to one of those courses and just ask them all your hunting questions, and they're going to be a very valuable resource for you as you get started. So go get your hunter safety. You can Google hunter safety for your state or hunter's education for your state and find courses near you and schedule it soon because hunting season will be upon us before we know it. And you've got to have that out of the way before you can really do anything else. All right, here's an interesting one. Do I need a rangefinder? So this is also sort of a short answer and a long answer question. Short answer is no. You don't need a rangefinder. You can hunt without a rangefinder successfully. And people did it for years and years and years, right? And most rifle cartridges shoot decently flat out to 225 or 250 yards. So for my rifle, I have a good old 30-06. I know that when I'm zeroed at 200 yards, at 225 yards, my bullet is going to land about 3 inches below where I'm aiming. And for a lot of situations, that is close enough accuracy to successfully kill a deer. And much more so with an elk that has a much bigger vital zone. So you can do a lot of hunting within 250 yards. And it's not too hard to judge whether something is within that range and make an estimate. Where it starts getting hard is out past your maximum point blank range. So that's what we call the range where you can basically hold on the animal and hit it. And for most modern rifle cartridges, that's somewhere between 225 to 275 yards when zeroed at 200 yards. Okay. So beyond your maximum point blank range, you now have to aim higher to drop that bullet into the animal at distance. And that's where it's really helpful to have a precise range reading and then a scope that you can dial to that specific range. So if you get a reading on the animal and you say, oh, it's at 367 yards, you can dial your scope for that distance and you don't have to guess and hold over the animal when you're shooting. So my advice is if you can afford a rangefinder and you want one, by all means, go get one. It can be very helpful. It can also be very helpful for archery hunting and perhaps more important for archery hunting. But if you don't have the money right now, or you just don't want to bother with it, go out and hunt. And with a rifle, keep your shots within a reasonable distance and you'll be just fine. Okay, let's look at our next question here. And that is, how much meat can you get off a deer? So the quick answer is about 45% of the live weight. A lot of people, I think, overestimate this. They think, oh, I'm going to go kill a 200-pound deer and I'm going to get 150 or 100 pounds of meat. And that's just way off base. You're going to lose a lot of weight from the animal's organs. You're going to lose a lot of weight from the animal's hide. And then as you cut it down and make it into something that you'd want to eat at your table, you're going to lose bone weight. You're going to trim off a lot of fat and connective tissue and all sorts of things. And when it comes down to it, when it's packaged and in your freezer, it's going to be about 45% of the live weight of the animal. So if you went out and killed a 175-pound deer, that would yield about 79 pounds of meat. And that's not precise. The cleaner and better you are at butchering the animal, the more meat you're going to get. And then also it depends on the condition of the animal. If you got a really fat deer and you weren't keeping that fat, you would obviously have a lower percentage of yield compared to the live weight. One follow-up question to that is, do you keep the hide when you're hunting? And usually I don't keep the hide. There are instances where I would keep the hide, but usually I don't. So when I'm deer hunting, I have no problem taking the meat from the animal and leaving the hide. I've thought about keeping hides before, and I would like to. I'm interested in getting into tanning hides. It's just, I start to think about it and think of all the steps involved, and I think, am I actually going to take the time and do this? And usually the answer is no. Now, if I killed a nice bear that had a good hide, I would likely take that and go get it tanned because there's something special and memorable about a bear hide. Now, some animals are hunted specifically for their hides. Some people might hunt coyotes and collect enough coyotes to make something with the hides, like trimming clothing or making a blanket. These are things that I haven't really done myself, but I'd be interested in doing in the future. And I think it's a reasonable use of the animal. If you're hunting coyotes for their hide, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. There may also be times when you kill animals to reduce the damage they're doing to crops or to livestock. And I think that is an acceptable reason to kill an animal as well, if they're damaging property or threatening your life, for example. So back to the question, do you take the hide when you're hunting an animal? Sometimes, if that's the intent of hunting the animal. However, if you've killed an animal for meat, I think it's reasonable to take the meat and leave the hide. All right, our next question is, should I zero my rifle at 100 or 200 yards? This is a great question. And when we're talking about zeroing a rifle, we're talking about sighting in a rifle. So when you zero your rifle at 200 yards, for example, that means when you put your crosshair on a target that's 200 yards away, your bullet is going to land where you're aiming, or very close to where you're aiming. Now, it stands to reason that if you're zeroed at 200 yards, likely if you're shooting at a target beyond that, and say you aimed your crosshair at a target that was at 300 yards, your bullet would land lower than where your crosshair is at because the bullet starts to drop and gravity is acting on it over time. So, should you zero your rifle at 100 or 200 yards? My general answer is 200 yards. It just makes it so easy with most modern cartridges. If you have a 6.5 Creedmoor, if you have a 30-06, which isn't a modern cartridge, but it's used by modern hunters, if you have a 270, likely you can zero at 200 yards and be effective out to 225, even 250 yards without having to hold over the animal. So when I say hold over, if you're making a long shot and you know your bullet is going to drop at that distance, you might hold your point of aim, your crosshair above the animal, expecting your bullet to drop down and hit the animal at that distance. Well, with many of these common hunting cartridges, if you zero at 200 yards, even out to 250 yards, your bullet is only going to drop maybe 3 inches below your zero. And that is generally acceptable when you're hunting to make a kill shot. Most animals are going to have a vital zone of at least 6 inches in diameter, likely more. So if you can put that bullet in that 6-inch circle, kind of the size of a paper plate, you're likely going to kill the animal. So it's okay if that bullet drops even 3 inches. So the 200-yard zero is super helpful because basically if you see an animal that you're hunting, you can likely just aim at it and shoot as long as it's within, say, 250 yards, just depending on your cartridge. Now, that doesn't mean that the 100-yard zero is useless. If you're never going to shoot over 100 yards, there's no reason to zero at 200 yards. Or maybe you're starting with a 30-30, like the gun that I started hunting deer with. And I had a 30-30 lever action with no scope on it. So shooting past 100 yards was tricky without a scope. And also that 30-30 has kind of a rainbow trajectory. And so once I'm starting to shoot past 100 yards, I think I was shooting 180 grain bullets. Those bullets would drop a lot past 100 yards. So with a rifle like that or a cartridge like that, you might zero at 100 yards and call it good because you just know you're not going to be making those shots at much longer distances. Where I was hunting in Tennessee for a while, there were people who zeroed their rifle at 50 yards because the way that they were hunting in a tree stand or just in thick forests, they weren't going to shoot much over 50 yards. So you can certainly adjust your zero distance, but for most Western hunting applications, I would recommend 200 yards and be happy with it. Okay, let's look at our next question. How do I get physically ready for a hunting trip? So I actually did a podcast on this. It's number 36. It's called How to Make a Training Plan and Crush Your Hunts This Fall. So go check out that podcast if you haven't listened to it. Generally, this question, the answer is it depends. It depends if you're doing sort of a Western style hunt where you will be hunting with a pack, or if maybe you're doing a tree stand style whitetail hunt where you're going to be sitting all day. It just depends on the type of hunt that you're going on. But I will give you quick examples for both. So if you're going on a Western hunt where you're going to be hiking with a pack, really the best way to prepare is to hike with a pack. So get the backpack you're going to use, put some gallon jugs of water in there, put some weights, and go hiking. If you're in a flat area, try to find some stairs to simulate the hills that you might be hiking out west. Now, if you haven't backpacked very much before, or even if you have, be careful when you start this type of training. I can tell you from experience that it is very easy to go too hard, too fast. And what I mean is you put on a backpack and you put 40 pounds in it. And you think, 40 pounds, that's not that much. I can bench press 40 pounds easy. So you think, okay, I'm going to put in another 30 pounds, or I'm going to put in another 10 pounds, whatever. And suddenly you're over 50 pounds and you're hiking around. And then you hike around and you're like, okay, this is pretty tiring, or it's tough on my feet, but still, it doesn't seem like that much weight and I'm doing fine. Here's the problem with that. You're putting a lot of stress on your knees. And while you can strengthen your knees in your joints, certainly, they don't recover the same way that your muscles do. So if you're trying to strengthen the ligaments and tendons and things in your knees that can be strengthened, you actually have to give it a lot more time than you have to give a muscle to strengthen and recover. And what that means is you have to start out with smaller loads than you would expect. The military has actually done studies on this where they found that sort of around 50 pounds is kind of the maximum where you can hike with a pack, where you can ruck without being in danger of serious injury. And that's for a fit person. That may not be you. If you're not very fit yet or not very strong, you're going to have to start out with even less than that. There's programs out there for rucking that start people with 20 pounds and only go up to maybe 50 pounds. And so keep that in mind, is if you're going to put stress on your joints, start small and build your way up. It's going to feel like you're not doing much work at first, but this is really the best way to become a strong backpacker injury-free. Now, you can also go to the gym and do squats and deadlifts to help build your body's capacity to carry heavy loads. And I think that would be the second thing I would recommend for a Western hunter. If you're hunting in a scenario where you are going to sit in a tree stand for a long time, you might also be looking at dragging a deer back to your truck. So you might train a little bit differently. Maybe you should drag a sled or flip some tires or lift in the gym and build up that strength. And maybe you should just walk more and hike more or even run, but you don't need to worry about having that pack on you because you're not going to be hunting with it. So just depending on what style of hunting you're going to do, just think about what it's going to require and do something. Do something consistently to start getting stronger, to start building your cardio, and you're going to have a better hunt. All right, guys. Well, I think this is a good stopping point for today. I can definitely do more Q&A style episodes in the future if you enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email at persistenceoutdoors2022@gmail.com. You can also reach out on the Persistence Outdoors Facebook or Instagram pages. I'm not super active on those. I need to figure out how to get more pictures of me while I'm hunting. A lot of times I'm hunting by myself and I don't really think people are interested in landscape photos, right? But I do check those, and if you send a question my way, I'm happy to find an answer or talk about it on the show. The last thing before I sign off, we talked about this earlier, but if you haven't done your hunter safety, go sign up for a course today. You've got to do it, and you don't want to end up in November, 2 days before the hunting season, and realize you can't get a license because you haven't got your hunter safety. So just be proactive, get that out of the way, and then next week, we'll start talking about the next steps to get out hunting this fall. With that, I will wrap this up. Go get your hunter safety, and I will catch you next week.